a 9-year-old boy, stood up in court, looked the judge in the eyes and said, "Your Honor, I'm here today as my mother's lawyer." The room froze. Gasps echoed between the marble columns. What followed was something no one could have imagined. Secrets unraveled, hearts were shaken, and a story of love, resilience, and truth began to unfold, one that would change not just a family's future, but an entire nation's view of justice. Get ready to witness a child's courage rise against power, silence, and privilege. This isn't just a courtroom drama. It's a story of redemption, healing, and a mother-son bond that couldn't be broken. Like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from, because what you're about to hear will stay with you forever. The Manila courtroom hummed with the familiar sounds of justice in motion, shuffling papers, whispered consultations, the occasional cough breaking through the air-conditioned silence. Morning light streamed through tall windows, casting long rectangles across the polished wooden floor. Judge Ramon Velasco adjusted his glasses and glanced at his watch. Another custody case, his 23rd this month. Case number 4587, Reyes versus Reyes, announced the court clerk, her voice clipped and efficient. Gabriel Reyes straightened his expensive suit as he rose from his seat. At 42, he carried himself with the practiced confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. Beside him, his attorney, a sharp-featured woman whose services cost more per hour than many Filipinos earned in a month, nodded respectfully toward the bench. On the opposite side of the room, Isabella Reyes sat alone. No attorney flanked her side. Her hands, calloused from years of work, rested atop a manila folder containing what little documentation she could gather. Her dark eyes, though tired, held steady determination. But it was the small figure beside her that caught Judge Velasco's attention. 9-year-old Miguel Reyes sat perfectly straight, his school uniform pressed and proper despite the early hour. A notebook, bound in faded blue with dog-eared corners, rested on his lap. Unlike most children his age who found themselves reluctantly dragged into family court, Miguel appeared alert, present, watching the proceedings with intelligent eyes that seemed to absorb every detail. Judge Velasco cleared his throat. "Mrs. Reyes, I see you're representing yourself today." Isabella nodded, rising slowly. "Yes, Your Honor, I couldn't afford—" "Your Honor," a clear, high voice interrupted, "I'm here today as my mother's lawyer." The room fell silent. Judge Velasco's pen paused mid-signature. Gabriel's confident posture faltered slightly as he turned to look at his son. Miguel stood beside his mother, adjusting his school tie with one hand, while the other clutched his notebook. His voice had been small but certain, carrying across the hushed courtroom with surprising clarity. "Young man," Judge Velasco began, unsure whether to be amused or concerned, "this is a formal proceeding. You can't—" "I know this is an adult hearing," Miguel continued, his English precise and careful, "but I also know that under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which the Philippines ratified in 1990, I have the right to express my views freely in matters affecting my welfare. This case definitely affects my welfare." Isabella placed a gentle hand on her son's shoulder, her expression a mixture of pride and anxiety. "Miguel, sit down, Anak. This isn't—" "Let the boy speak," Judge Velasco said, curiosity getting the better of him. "Go. On, Miguel." Miguel opened his notebook. "I've prepared some notes, Your Honor. They explain why my father's petition for sole custody is based on misleading information." Gabriel's attorney rose immediately. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular and inappropriate. The child has clearly been coached." "I haven't been coached," Miguel responded, looking directly at the attorney. "I've been researching. There's a difference." A ripple of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Judge Velasco raised his hand for silence, his interest genuinely piqued. In 30 years on the bench, he'd never encountered anything quite like this. "Mrs. Santos," he addressed Gabriel's attorney, "while this is indeed irregular, I'm inclined to hear what the boy has to say. After all, it is his future we're deciding today." Miguel took a deep breath and continued. "My father claims my mother is an unfit parent because she works long hours as a nurse at Manila General Hospital. He says I'm often left unsupervised." Miguel flipped a page in his notebook. "But what he doesn't mention is that he refused to pay the court-ordered child support for the past 3 years, which is why my mother has to work double shifts." Gabriel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I've kept track of every day for the past year," Miguel said, turning his notebook toward the judge. Inside were meticulous tables, color-coded and organized by month, showing his daily schedule. I'm never unsupervised. When my mother works late, I stay with my Lola, my grandmother, or with our neighbor, Mrs. Deason, who is a retired teacher. Judge Velasco leaned forward, genuinely impressed by the boy's organization. And you made these charts yourself? Yes, Your Honor. I like math and statistics. My teacher says I have a gift for organizing information. Isabella watched her son with quiet amazement. She had known Miguel was bright. His teachers had said as much during every parent-teacher conference, but she had no idea. He'd been documenting their daily life with such precision. My father also claims he can provide me with better educational opportunities, Miguel continued. That's true in theory. He has more money, but the boy hesitated for the first time, glancing briefly at his father before continuing. In the 4 years since my parents separated, my father has attended exactly 2 school events. He's missed 3 science fairs where I won awards, all my piano recitals, and he doesn't know that I've skipped ahead 2 grades in mathematics. Gabriel's face flushed. That's not fair, Miguel. I've been very busy with order, Judge Velasco interjected softly. Mr. Reyes, you'll have your chance to respond. He turned back to Miguel. Please continue. Miguel nodded gratefully. The final reason my father gives for wanting custody is that he can provide a more stable home environment with his new wife. But I've only met Mrs. Reyes, my father's new wife, 3 times, always with my father present. And each time, she told me different things about where I would sleep in their house if I lived there. Judge Velasco glanced at Gabriel, whose confident demeanor had visibly eroded. Is there anything else, Miguel? The boy closed his notebook and looked directly at the judge. Yes, Your Honor, I love my father. I believe he cares about me in his way. But my mother is the one who helps me with homework every night, even when she's tired from work. She's the one who knows I'm allergic to peanuts, that I have trouble sleeping when it rains, and that I want to be a doctor someday. Like her. His voice wavered slightly, but he continued. My father wants custody now because his new family looks better with a child in the picture, not because he knows what's best for me. The courtroom remained perfectly still as Miguel returned to his seat beside Isabella, who wiped a tear from her cheek before squeezing her son's hand. Judge Velasco removed his glasses, genuinely moved by the boy's presentation. This is unusual, he said finally, but I believe it provides valuable insight. He turned toward Gabriel and his attorney. Mrs. Santos, would you like to cross-examine the witness? The attorney leaned over to whisper urgently with Gabriel, who appeared increasingly uncomfortable. No, Your Honor, Mrs. Santos replied after a moment, but we would like to request a brief recess to confer with our client. Granted, Judge Velasco said. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes. As the judge rose and retreated to his chambers, he found himself profoundly affected by what he had just witnessed. A 9-year-old boy had just delivered one of the most honest testimonies he'd heard in decades on the bench, and somehow he suspected this case was about to take an unexpected turn. 6 months before Miguel Reyes would stand in that Manila courtroom, life had settled into a predictable rhythm for him and his mother. Their apartment in Makati was small but comfortable, a 2-bedroom unit on the 8th floor of an aging building where the elevator worked most days, and the water pressure was reliable, if not strong. The walls were thin enough that they could hear Mr. Mendoza practicing his saxophone next door every evening, but Isabella had turned it into a game, teaching Miguel to identify songs from just a few notes. On this particular Tuesday morning, Isabella moved quietly through their morning routine, careful not to wake Miguel before necessary. She prepared his lunch, chicken adobo leftovers, rice and sliced mangoes, and tucked a small note inside the container. Good luck on your math test today. You'll amaze them as always, Hearts Mama. At exactly 6:15 a.m., she gently opened his bedroom door. Anak, time to get up. Miguel was already awake, reading a book about the human circulatory system by the light of his small desk lamp. At 9, he possessed an insatiable curiosity that both delighted and occasionally exhausted his mother. Did you know the heart pumps about 5 liters of blood every minute? He asked by way of greeting. Isabella smiled. I did know that. I'm a nurse, remember? Now put on your uniform while I make breakfast. Their morning moved with practiced efficiency. Breakfast, pandesal with cheese and hot chocolate, teeth brushing, last-minute backpack check. By 7 a.m., they were walking hand in hand to the jeepney stop. joining the river of commuters flowing through Manila's awakening streets. "Mama, when does your shift end today?" Miguel asked as they waited for transportation. "I'll be home by 6, Anak. Mrs. Dizon will pick you up from school and stay with you until then." Isabella smoothed his hair. "Do you have your key?" Miguel patted his pocket confidently. "In my inside pocket, with 20 pesos for emergency snacks and Mrs. Dizon's phone number written down just in case." The jeepney arrived, colorfully painted and already crowded. They squeezed in, finding space near the back. Isabella held Miguel close as the vehicle lurched forward into Manila's morning traffic. These daily commutes were their special time, 15 precious minutes of conversation before the day pulled them indifferent. "Directions. Are you nervous about your test?" she asked. Miguel shook his head. "Not really. I studied with Lola on Sunday. She quizzed me until I got everything right 3 times in a row." Isabella smiled, thinking of her mother's methodical approach to education. "That sounds like Lola." They arrived at St. Francis Academy just as the morning bell rang. Isabella knelt to straighten Miguel's uniform tie. "Be good, be kind, be brilliant," she said, their daily mantra. "I will," he promised, hugging her tightly before running toward the school gates, where his classmates were lining up. Isabella watched until he disappeared inside, then checked her watch. She had exactly 22 minutes to reach Manila General Hospital before her shift began. The emergency room at Manila General was already bustling when Isabella arrived. She changed quickly into her scrubs and joined the morning handover, where the night shift nurses briefed the day team on current patients. "Reyes, you're in beds 12 through 20 today," head nurse Dalisay announced, handing Isabella a clipboard. "Bed 18 needs special attention. 70-year-old male with respiratory distress. Doctor wants vitals." "Every 30 minutes." Isabella nodded, already reviewing the patient information. This was where she excelled, in the organized chaos of the emergency department, where quick thinking and compassion worked hand in hand. Her colleagues respected her efficiency and gentle bedside manner, even as they occasionally teased her for the meticulously organized supply cart she maintained. By mid-afternoon, Isabella had stabilized a child with severe asthma, assisted with setting a broken arm, and comforted an elderly woman awaiting news about her husband. She was charting medications when her phone vibrated in her pocket. A text from Mrs. Dizon confirming she'd picked up Miguel from school. The message included a photo of Miguel at their kitchen table, already deep in homework, with the caption, "Your little genius is solving math problems that make my head hurt." Isabella smiled, typing a quick thank you before returning to her charts. Just 3 more hours before she could go home. She was checking on the respiratory patient in bed 18 when head nurse Dalisay approached. "Isabella, there's someone asking for you at reception. Says it's important." A patient's family member. "No." Dalisay hesitated. "He says he's your ex-husband." Isabella froze. Gabriel rarely made appearances in person, their communication limited mostly to terse text messages about schedule changes or occasional financial disputes. For him to show up at her workplace meant something significant had happened. "Can you cover my patients for 10 minutes?" she asked, already removing her stethoscope. Dalisay nodded. "Take whatever time you need." Gabriel was waiting in the small reception area, looking out of place in his designer suit amid the hospital's clinical environment. When he spotted Isabella, he straightened, adjusting his tie in a gesture she remembered all too well. His preparation for delivering news he knew she wouldn't like. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. "Is Miguel okay?" "Miguel is fine," Gabriel replied, his voice measured. "But we need to talk. Is there somewhere private?" Isabella led him to a small courtyard where staff sometimes took breaks. At this hour, it was empty, save for a stray cat sunning itself on a bench. "What's this about, Gabriel?" He handed her an envelope, thick cream-colored paper with an embossed law firm logo in the corner. "My attorney prepared these papers. I'm filing for full custody of Miguel." Isabella felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. "What? Why would you—" "It's time, Isabella. I can provide him with opportunities you simply can't afford. The best schools, international travel, connections that will set him up for life." Gabriel's tone was reasonable, practiced. "You're a good mother, but you work too much. Miguel deserves more than an empty apartment and take-out dinners." "Our apartment is not empty," Isabella said, her voice low but intense. "It's filled with books and music and love, and we rarely eat take-out. I cook fresh food almost every night. Gabriel sighed. That's not the point. Look at this place. He gestured toward the hospital. You spend more time here than with our son. Meanwhile, I've built a stable home with Sophia. We have a house in Forbes Park with a bedroom already prepared for Miguel. He'll have a yard to play in, a swimming pool. He has everything he needs, Isabella interrupted, and he's happy. Have you asked what he wants? He's 9, Isabella. Children don't know what's best for them. Gabriel checked his watch. The hearing is scheduled for 6 months from now. That gives you time to prepare. His expression softened slightly. I'm not trying to be cruel. This is about Miguel's future. Isabella clutched the envelope, her knuckles white. This is about your ego. You've barely been present in his life for 4 years, and suddenly you want to play Father of the Year. That's unfair. I've been building a business, securing our family's future. Our family? Isabella laughed bitterly. You left our family when Miguel was 5. You started a new family. Gabriel's phone chimed. He glanced at it and frowned. I have a meeting. We can discuss this later when emotions aren't so high. He turned to leave, then paused. Isabella, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Think about what's best for Miguel. As he walked away, Isabella sank onto the bench, the envelope heavy in her hands. The stray cat approached cautiously, rubbing against her legs as if sensing her distress. 6 months. She had 6 months to figure out how to fight a man whose resources dwarfed her own, a man who could afford the best lawyers, who had connections throughout Manila's elite circles. 6 months to protect the life she'd built with her son. Isabella took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and stood. She would not fall apart. Not here, not now. She had patience waiting, and later, Miguel would be waiting too. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same strength and determination she brought to everything in her life. As she returned to the emergency room, Isabella made a silent promise. Gabriel might have money and power on his side, but she had something far more valuable, the truth of who had really been there for Miguel all these years, and somehow she would find a way to make that truth heard. Miguel sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, surrounded by an organized chaos of library books, printouts, and sticky notes. 3 weeks had passed since he'd overheard his mother crying in the kitchen, the cream-colored envelope spread before her on the table. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the thin walls of their apartment carried sound too well. His father wanted to take him away, permanently. That night, after his mother had fallen asleep, Miguel had slipped into the kitchen and examined the documents. Many of the words were unfamiliar, legal terms that swam before his eyes, but he understood. Enough. His father claimed his mother was insufficient as a primary caregiver, and that Miguel was lacking necessary structure and opportunity for advancement. The accusations stung like physical blows. Miguel knew his mother worked hard, harder than anyone he'd ever met. He knew about the sacrifices she made, the sleep she lost, the simple pleasures she denied herself to ensure he had. Everything he needed. Now 3 weeks into his secret research project, Miguel's bedroom had transformed into a miniature war room. Each day after school, he would tell his mother or Mrs. Dizon that he was working on a special science project. In reality, he was building a case. Miguel checked his watch, a simple digital timepiece his mother had given him for his 8th birthday. It was nearly 4 o'clock. He had about 2 hours before his mother returned from her shift. He turned to his newest acquisition, a borrowed copy of Philippine Family Law, a practical guide from the university library. The librarian, Mr. Aquino, had raised an eyebrow when Miguel requested it, but hadn't questioned him further. Miguel had discovered that adults rarely questioned children who acted with purpose and confidence. Burden of proof, Miguel murmured, scanning the index. He flipped to the relevant section and began taking careful notes in his blue notebook, the one his grandmother had given him for Christmas. The spine was already creased from constant use, the pages filled with his neat, compact handwriting. A gentle knock interrupted his concentration. Miguel, may I come in? He quickly swept the legal documents under his bed. Yes, Mama. Isabella entered, still wearing her hospital scrubs. Her hair was pulled back in a practical bun, a few strands escaping around her face. Despite the evident fatigue in her eyes, she smiled warmly. You're home early, Miguel observed. Dr. Santos let me leave after my shift instead of staying for overtime. She sat on the edge of his bed. What are you working on? Another science project? Miguel nodded, showing her one of his astronomy books, a convenient cover for his real research. We're studying the solar system. Isabella brushed his hair back from his forehead, always learning something new. Her expression grew more serious. Anak, I wanted to talk to you about something important. Miguel felt his heart rate quicken. Was she going to tell him about the custody battle? He'd been waiting for this conversation, carefully planning what he would say, how he would reassure her. Your father called today, Isabella continued. He'd like you to spend this weekend at his house, with Sophia. Miguel's shoulders tensed. Weekends with his father were rare, usually limited to occasional Sunday brunches at expensive restaurants, where Gabriel would spend most of the time on his phone. The idea of an entire weekend at his father's house, with his stepmother and her perfectly coordinated furniture, made his stomach tighten. Do I have to go? He asked quietly. Isabella sighed. I think it would be good for you to spend some time with him. He is your father, Miguel. But what about our Saturday market trip? And Lola's? Coming for Sunday lunch. We were going to make bibinka together. Lola will understand. We'll make bibinka next weekend instead. Isabella squeezed his hand. Your father wants to be more involved in your life. That's a good thing. Miguel studied his mother's face. He could see she was trying to be fair, to not influence his relationship with his father, despite whatever tension existed between the adults. It was one of the many things he admired about her. Okay, he agreed reluctantly. When will he pick me up? Friday after school. Pack enough clothes for 2 nights, and don't forget your toothbrush this time. She stood, stretching her back slightly. Now how about we make some pancit for dinner? I bought fresh shrimp on the way home. As they moved to the kitchen together, Miguel's mind was already racing. A weekend at his father's house was not part of his plan, but perhaps it could be useful. Perhaps he could gather information, the kind that might help when the custody hearing finally arrived. Gabriel's house in Forbes Park loomed before them, modern and imposing with its clean lines and expansive glass windows. A security guard nodded respectfully as Gabriel's BMW passed through the gates and up the circular driveway. Here we are, Gabriel announced unnecessarily as the car came to a stop. Sophia's been preparing all day. She's excited to have you stay with us. Miguel nodded politely, clutching his backpack as he exited the car. The house looked even larger up close, 3 stories of sleek architecture surrounded by carefully manicured gardens. It was beautiful, certainly, but it didn't feel like a home. Not like the apartment with its slightly peeling paint and the window that sometimes stuck. Sophia greeted them at the door, elegant in a casual silk blouse and white pants. Her smile was wide, but didn't quite reach her eyes. Miguel, welcome. We're so happy you're spending the weekend with us. Miguel accepted her brief hug. Thank you for having me, Tita Sophia. She led them through the marble-floored entryway into a spacious living room where every piece of furniture looked too perfect to use. We've prepared a special room for you upstairs. Would you like to see it? The special room was on the 3rd floor, a large, immaculately decorated space with a queen-sized bed, a desk equipped with a new laptop, and shelves filled with books that looked as though they'd never been opened. The walls were painted a soft blue, and sports equipment, a basketball, tennis rackets, a soccer ball, had been artfully arranged in one corner. What do you think? Gabriel asked proudly. Your own space whenever you want it. Miguel set his backpack down carefully. It's very nice, thank you. The laptop is yours, Gabriel added. Top of the line. Much better than using those old computers at your school library. Miguel ran his fingers along the laptop's smooth surface. Can I call Mama tonight to say goodnight? A flicker of annoyance crossed Gabriel's face. Of course, but later. Sophia has prepared dinner. Everyone's waiting downstairs. Everyone? Miguel asked. Some friends are joining us. Important people I want you to meet. Dinner was an elaborate affair with 6 adults, and Miguel seated around a long table. The conversation flowed around him. Business ventures, property investments, political connections, while he quietly ate his perfectly prepared but somehow flavorless food. Occasionally, one of the adults would address him directly. So, Miguel, your father tells us you're quite the scholar, said a man introduced. As Senator Lim. What subjects interest you? Science and mathematics, sir, Miguel replied politely. And I like to read about law sometimes. This earned a laugh from the adults. Law? At your age? The senator seemed amused. Following in your father's business footsteps already, I see. Gabriel smiled proudly. He has a natural aptitude for complex systems. With the right education, he could go far. Have you considered International Academy for him? Asked another guest. My son attends. Best connections a child could make for their future. We're exploring several options, Sophia interjected smoothly. Miguel deserves the very best. As the adults continued discussing his future as if he weren't present, Miguel observed them carefully, noting which names seemed to carry weight, which relationships appeared most valuable to his father. He was building a mental map of his father's world, information that might prove useful later. After dinner, while the adults moved to the living room for drinks, Miguel quietly slipped away to explore the house. He moved systematically from room to room, taking mental notes of everything he saw. In his father's home office, he discovered a calendar with several dates circled in red, including one labeled Custody Hearing 2 p.m. In the guest room, he found folders of documents, some bearing the same law firm logo as the custody papers. Miguel was carefully photographing these documents with his mother's old digital camera when he heard footsteps approaching. He quickly returned everything to its place and pretended to be examining the bookshelves when Gabriel entered. "There you are," his father said. "What are you doing in here?" "Just looking at the books," Miguel replied innocently. "You have so many." Gabriel seemed satisfied with this explanation. "It's getting late. Time for bed. You can call your mother now if you'd like." As Miguel followed his father out of the room, he felt the weight of the camera in his pocket. He'd discovered something important tonight, not just documents, but insight into his father's world. A world of connections and influence, yes, but also a world where Miguel himself seemed more like an acquisition than a son. Later, lying in the too-soft bed in his too-perfect room, Miguel whispered goodnight to his mother over the phone. "I miss you, Mama." "I miss you too, Anak. Are you having a good time?" Miguel paused, considering his answer carefully. "I'm learning a lot," he said finally. And that, at least, was entirely true. The public library of Makati wasn't large or particularly well-funded, but to Miguel, it was a sanctuary. In the 2 months since his weekend at his father's house, he had become a fixture here every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. The librarians knew him by name now, greeting him with warm smiles as he made his way to his usual table in the reference section. "Good afternoon, Miguel," Ms. Cruz called as he entered, his backpack heavy with books to return. "More research today?" Miguel nodded, placing the books on the return cart. "Yes, ma'am, and I was wondering if the book I requested has arrived yet." Ms. Cruz checked her computer. "Yes, it came in this morning. Child advocacy in Philippine courts. Are you sure this isn't for your mother or father?" "It's for a special project," Miguel replied, the explanation he'd been using consistently. It wasn't exactly a lie. This was the most important project of his life. Ms. Cruz studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. At 62, she had worked in the library long enough to recognize a child on a mission. "You know," she said finally, "if you need help understanding anything in these legal books, my brother is a retired family court attorney. He volunteers here on Thursdays." Miguel's eyes widened. "Really? Could I talk to him sometime?" "He'll be here tomorrow afternoon. I'll introduce you." She handed him the book. "Just promise me, whatever you're researching isn't going to get you into trouble." "It's not trouble, Ms. Cruz, it's justice." The earnestness in his voice made the librarian smile. "Well, that's different then. Justice is always worth pursuing." Miguel settled at his table and opened his notebook to a fresh page. The custody hearing was still 3 months away, but he was building his case methodically, piece by piece. Today's goal was to understand exactly what rights he had as a child in the proceedings. For 2 hours he read and took careful notes, occasionally consulting the small Filipino English legal dictionary he'd borrowed from Mr. Aquino at the university library. When his eyes grew tired, he stretched and walked to the window, watching the afternoon rain begin to fall on the street below. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Working late tonight. Mrs. Dizon will make dinner. Do your homework and don't stay up past 9. Love you." Miguel sent back a heart emoji and returned to his research. He had homework, yes, but this was more important. His teachers had little to worry about anyway. He was still at the top of his class, despite his extracurricular legal education. The next day, true to her word, Ms. Cruz introduced Miguel to her brother, attorney Roberto Cruz. The retired lawyer was a kind-faced man with salt-and-pepper hair and glasses similar to Miguel's own. "So," attorney Cruz said, settling into a chair across from Miguel, "my sister tells me you're interested in family law. That's unusual for someone your age." Miguel hesitated, then decided on honesty. My father is trying to take me away from my mother. He's filed for full custody and the hearing is in 3 months. My mother can't afford a lawyer, so I'm learning how to help her." If Attorney Cruz was surprised, he didn't show it. He simply nodded thoughtfully. "That's a heavy burden for young shoulders." "Not heavier than what my mother carries every day," Miguel replied. A smile tugged at the corner of the attorney's mouth. "Fair point. What have you learned so far?" For the next hour, Miguel shared his research, showing Attorney Cruz his notes and explaining the strategy he was developing. Rather than dismissing him, the retired lawyer listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions or suggesting additional resources. "You've done impressive work," he said finally. "But Miguel, even with all this preparation, the court might not allow you to speak directly. You're very young. Article 12 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child says I have the right to express my views in matters affecting me," Miguel countered. "And Philippine family courts follow the rule of best interests of the child, right? How can they determine my best interests without hearing from me?" Attorney Cruz chuckled. "You make a compelling argument, but courts have procedures and judges have discretion." "Then I need to make sure the judge wants to hear from me," Miguel said firmly. "I need to be so prepared that ignoring me would be obviously unfair." The attorney studied him for a long moment. "You know, in 30 years of practice, I've never met anyone quite like you, Miguel Reyes." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "I'm retired, but I still have colleagues who believe in justice more than billable hours. Call this number if you or your mother need specific advice before the hearing." Miguel accepted the card reverently. "Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. The road ahead won't be easy." Attorney Cruz stood to leave. "One more piece of advice. Document everything. Keep track of every visit with your father, every school event your mother attends, every detail of your daily routine. Evidence matters more than emotion in court." Miguel nodded solemnly. "I already started doing that 6 months ago." The attorney smiled. "Then you're already thinking like a lawyer." As weeks passed, Miguel's preparation intensified. He created a detailed timeline of his life since his parents' separation, highlighting his father's limited involvement. He compiled his school records, showing his academic excellence despite his mother's supposed insufficiency as a caregiver. He documented his daily schedule to demonstrate stability and structure. But most importantly, he began recording conversations. His mother's old digital recorder, once used for nursing school lectures, became his most valuable tool. With careful planning, he captured his father's phone calls, his stepmother's comments during visits, and even a particularly revealing conversation at a dinner his father hosted, where Miguel was discussed as an asset to the family's social standing. All of this he kept secret from his mother. Isabella noticed her son's increased focus on school projects, but attributed it to his naturally scholarly nature. She was too busy working extra shifts to save money for a lawyer to question him too deeply. One evening, a month before the hearing, Miguel found his mother at the kitchen table, surrounded by bank statements and calculator printouts. Her shoulders slumped with exhaustion, dark circles prominent beneath her eyes. "Mama," he said, softly, "are you okay?" Isabella quickly shuffled the papers together. "I'm fine, Anak. Just some boring adult paperwork." She forced a smile. "How was school today?" Instead of answering, Miguel climbed onto the chair beside her and wrapped his arms around her shoulders. "Don't worry about the custody hearing. Everything will be okay." Isabella stiffened, then relaxed into her son's embrace. "How did you know about that?" "I heard you talking on the phone," he admitted, "and I saw the papers that day." "Oh, Miguel." She turned to face him, her eyes filled with concern. "This isn't something you should worry about. Adult problems." "But it's not just an adult problem," he interrupted gently. "It's about me, right? About where I'll live and who I'll be with." Isabella nodded reluctantly. "Yes, but then I should have a say," Miguel said simply. "And I choose you, Mama. I'll always choose you." Tears welled in Isabella's eyes as she pulled him close. "I'm trying so hard to find a way to fight this. Your father has expensive lawyers, and I can barely afford the consultation fees for even a basic attorney." Miguel rested his head against her shoulder. "Maybe we don't need expensive lawyers to tell the truth. The truth isn't always enough in court, Anak. Sometimes it's about who can argue better, who knows the right procedures." Miguel thought about his blue notebook, filled now with legal strategies and case precedents. He thought about the recordings safely stored on memory cards hidden in his science textbook. He thought about Attorney Cruz's business card, tucked carefully in his wallet. "I believe in the truth, Mama," he said finally, "and I believe in you." That night, as his mother slept, Miguel sat cross-legged on his bed, reviewing his notes one more time. In 30 days, they would stand before a judge who would decide their future. His father would have power, connections, and professional legal representation. Miguel would have his blue notebook, months of careful research, and the unshakable certainty that he was fighting for what was right. It would have to be enough. 2 weeks before the custody hearing, Miguel found himself sitting in an unfamiliar office. The walls were lined with law books, certificates in elegant frames, and a large window overlooking the Makati skyline. Across the polished wooden desk sat attorney Lucia Mendoza, a former colleague of Attorney Cruz, and, as Miguel was quickly learning, one of the most respected family law advocates in Manila. "So," Attorney Mendoza said, reviewing the notes Miguel had presented, "Roberto sent you to me because he thinks you have an unusual but compelling case." Her eyes, sharp behind stylish glasses, studied Miguel with frank curiosity. He wasn't exaggerating. Miguel sat perfectly straight, his blue notebook open on his lap. "Thank you for meeting with us, Attorney Mendoza." Beside him, Isabella shifted uncomfortably. When Miguel had revealed that he'd been in contact with a lawyer, presenting Attorney Cruz's business card like a magic talisman, she had been stunned. Even more surprising was the prominent attorney's willingness to meet them on such short notice. "Mrs. Reyes," Attorney Mendoza addressed Isabella directly, "your son has compiled one of the most thorough case preparations I've seen from anyone, let alone a 9-year-old. His documentation is meticulous." Isabella glanced at Miguel, a mixture of pride and bewilderment on her face. "He's always been very organized." "It's more than organization," the attorney replied. "It's strategic. Thinking. Legal instinct." She turned back to Miguel. "You understand that normally, I wouldn't consider taking direction from a child in a custody case." "I understand," Miguel nodded seriously. "But I also understand that this case is about my life, and I have information that matters." A smile tugged at Attorney Mendoza's lips. "Roberto was right about you." She closed the folder containing Miguel's notes. "Here's what concerns me. Your father has hired Santos and Associates, one of the most aggressive family law firms in the city. They typically overwhelm opponents with procedural maneuvers and paperwork." Isabella's shoulders slumped slightly. "We can't afford to match that kind of legal power." "Perhaps not," Attorney Mendoza agreed. "But sometimes David defeats Goliath not by matching his strength, but by using different weapons entirely." She leaned forward. "I'm interested in your case, Mrs. Reyes, not just because this exceptional young man has clearly done his homework, but because I believe in justice, particularly for children." Hope flickered across Isabella's face. "Does that mean you'll represent us?" "It means I'll consider it, depending on what we discuss." "Today," the attorney turned to Miguel. "You mentioned recordings. May I hear them?" Miguel pulled out his mother's digital recorder and a small notebook containing timestamps and context for each recording. For the next 40 minutes, the office was filled with voices. Gabriel discussing Miguel as a strategic addition to his household, Sophia complaining about the inconvenience of having a child, disrupt their social schedule. Gabriel's lawyer suggesting they emphasize Isabella's work hours to portray her as an absent mother. With each recording, Attorney Mendoza's expression grew more serious. When the final clip ended, Gabriel admitting to a business associate that the custody filing was partly motivated by tax advantages for dependents, she removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Miguel, how did you obtain these recordings?" "I kept the recorder with me during visits with my father. Philippine law allows single-party consent for recording conversations you're part of," Miguel recited. "And for phone calls, I used the speaker function, so I was part of the conversation." The attorney raised an eyebrow. "You've researched recording consent laws?" "Yes, Ma'am. I didn't want to do anything illegal." Attorney Mendoza exchanged a glance with Isabella, who appeared equally astonished by her son's thoroughness. "Mrs. Reyes," the attorney said finally, "I'd like to represent you in this case. My usual fee is substantial, but given the circumstances, I'm prepared to take this pro bono." Isabella's eyes widened. "Pro bono? You mean free?" "Consider it an investment in justice, and in Miguel's future." Attorney Mendoza smiled. Something tells me he might become a colleague someday. As they prepared to leave, the attorney asked for a moment alone with Miguel. Isabella hesitated, then stepped outside, leaving her son with this unexpected ally. "Miguel," Attorney Mendoza said once they were alone, "what you've done is remarkable. But I need to ask you something important. Are you prepared for what might happen in court?" "I think so," Miguel replied. "I've studied how hearings work. I don't mean the procedures. I mean emotionally." Her voice softened. "Your father may say hurtful things. His lawyers certainly will. They'll try to paint your mother in the worst possible light, and they might try to portray your efforts as manipulation or coaching." Miguel considered this. "I understand. But isn't the truth stronger than their strategies?" "In principle, yes. In practice," she sighed. "The legal system isn't perfect, Miguel. Justice doesn't always prevail, even when it should. Then we need to make sure it does this time." Miguel's voice was quiet but determined. "My mother deserves someone fighting for her as hard as she fights." "For me?" Attorney Mendoza studied him for a long moment. "You know, in 20 years of practice, I've represented hundreds of children as a guardian ad litem. Most couldn't articulate what they wanted, let alone why. You're different. Is different good? In this case, I think it might be exactly what we need." She extended her hand formally. "Partners?" Miguel shook it solemnly. "Partners." The night before the hearing, Isabella sat on the edge of Miguel's bed, smoothing his blanket with nervous hands. "Are you sure you want to come tomorrow? You could stay with Lola instead." Miguel shook his head firmly. "I need to be there. It might be uncomfortable, Anak. Your father and we might say things that are difficult to hear." "I know." Miguel reached for her hand. "But, Attorney, Mendoza says I have the right to be there. It's about my life." Isabella studied her son's face, the serious eyes behind his glasses, the determined set of his jaw so like her own. When had her little boy grown so wise? "When did you become so brave?" she asked softly. "I learned from you." Miguel squeezed her hand. "Every day I watch you be brave, going to work even when you're tired, making sure. I have everything I need even when it's hard, standing up to Father when he tries to make you feel small." Tears welled in Isabella's eyes. "Oh, Miguel." "Don't worry about tomorrow," he said, with a confidence that belied his years. "Attorney Mendoza is very good, and we have the truth on our side." Isabella leaned forward to kiss his forehead. "Get some sleep now. Tomorrow will be a long day." After she left, Miguel lay awake staring at the ceiling. Despite his show of confidence, anxiety churned in his stomach. What if the judge didn't listen? What if his father's expensive lawyers found ways to twist the truth? What if all his preparation wasn't enough? He turned to look at his desk, where his blue notebook lay beside the clothes he'd carefully selected for tomorrow. His school uniform, freshly pressed. It was the most formal outfit he owned, and Attorney Mendoza had agreed it would make an appropriate impression. Miguel closed his eyes and took 3 deep breaths, the way his mother had taught him to do when worry threatened to overwhelm him. He had done everything possible to prepare. The rest would happen tomorrow. Sleep came eventually, and with it, dreams of standing tall in a courtroom, his voice clear and strong, speaking truths that no one could deny. The Manila family court building stood imposing against the morning sky, its concrete facade weathered by years of tropical storms and urban pollution. Inside, the air conditioning hummed aggressively, creating a chilly atmosphere that matched the institutional sterility of the space. Miguel, Isabella, and Attorney Mendoza arrived an hour early, settling in a quiet corner of the waiting area to review their strategy one final time. Miguel wore his school uniform, crisp and neat, with his mother's old digital recorder tucked safely in his pocket, a talisman of sorts, though Attorney Mendoza had advised against recording the proceedings without court permission. "Remember, Attorney," Mendoza said quietly, "Mr. Reyes's team will present first. They'll likely focus on financial stability and educational opportunities. When it's our turn, I'll establish the strong foundation of care and support you've provided, Mrs. Reyes." Isabella nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She wore her best dress, a simple navy blue sheath that she typically reserved for special occasions at the hospital. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, emphasizing her composed expression despite the worry evident in her eyes. "And Miguel," the attorney continued, "if the judge permits you to speak, and I believe he will, just focus on telling your truth clearly and respectfully, no accusations or emotional outbursts." I understand, Miguel replied, patting his blue notebook. I'm ready. At that moment, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. Gabriel had arrived, flanked by his attorney, a tall, severe-looking woman with impeccable clothes and an imposing leather briefcase. Behind them followed Sophia and two other well-dressed individuals, whom Miguel recognized as character witnesses his father had mentioned. Gabriel spotted them across the waiting area. After a brief word with his attorney, he approached alone, his expensive suit and confident stride creating an impression of authority. Isabella, he nodded curtly before turning to Miguel with a warmer expression. Good morning, son. You look very handsome in your uniform. Thank you, father, Miguel replied politely. Gabriel glanced at Attorney Mendoza with poorly concealed surprise. I wasn't aware you had secured representation. There have been several developments you're not aware of, Attorney Mendoza replied smoothly, extending her hand. Lucia Mendoza. I'll be representing Mrs. Reyes today. Gabriel shook her hand briefly, his expression calculating as he recognized the name of one of Manila's most respected family attorneys. I see. He turned back to Isabella. I hope you understand I'm only doing what's best for Miguel's future. Before Isabella could respond, a court officer appeared. Reyes versus Reyes. Judge Velasco's courtroom, 5 minutes. The hearing room was smaller than Miguel had imagined from his research. Intimate, almost, with rich wooden paneling and the Philippine flag standing proudly beside the judge's bench. Rows of benches provided seating for participants and the few observers present, primarily court staff and law students observing proceedings. Judge Ramon Velasco entered, and the court officer called for all to rise. The judge was an older man with silver-streaked hair and thoughtful eyes behind reading glasses. He reviewed the docket briefly before addressing the room. Case number 4587, Reyes versus Reyes, petition for modification of custody. He looked up, surveying the parties. I see both parents are present with counsel. Let's proceed with petitioner's presentation. Gabriel's attorney rose gracefully. Your Honor, I am Maria Santos representing Mr. Gabriel Reyes. We are seeking full custody of minor child Miguel Reyes, age 9, currently residing with his mother. Mr. Reyes can provide superior educational and social opportunities, financial stability, and a consistent home environment with 2 present parents. What followed was a polished presentation emphasizing Gabriel's successful business, spacious home, connections to elite schools, and ability to provide cultural experiences through international travel. Character witnesses testified to Gabriel's responsibility and standing in the community. Financial statements. Detailed educational funds already established in Miguel's name. Throughout this presentation, Miguel took careful notes, occasionally sliding his notebook toward Attorney Mendoza to highlight inconsistencies or exaggerations. The attorney would nod slightly, incorporating these observations into her own notes. When it was their turn, Attorney Mendoza approached the matter differently. Rather than attempting to match Gabriel's impressive financial portfolio, she focused on stability, continuity, and genuine caregiving. Your Honor, while material advantages are certainly considerations in determining a child's best interests, they are not the only considerations, nor, I would argue, the most important ones. She presented evidence of Isabella's consistent presence at parent-teacher conferences, medical appointments, and extracurricular activities. She introduced affidavits from Miguel's teachers praising his academic excellence and emotional well-being under Isabella's care. Most compelling was her presentation of Miguel's daily schedule, the very charts he had created himself, demonstrating the structured, nurturing environment Isabella maintained despite her work. Responsibilities. Mrs. Reyes has created not just a home, but a haven for her son, Attorney Mendoza concluded, a place where he has thrived academically, emotionally, and socially. The petitioner offers hypothetical advantages that come at the cost of separating a child from the parent who has been his primary caregiver and emotional anchor. As rebuttals and cross-examinations proceeded, tension in the courtroom mounted. Gabriel's attorney suggested Isabella's work schedule rendered her functionally absent, while Attorney Mendoza highlighted Gabriel's minimal participation in Miguel's life over the past 4 years, documented through visitation records and school event attendance. Judge Velasco listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions of both parties. His expression remained neutral, offering no hint of his leanings. Finally, as the formal presentations concluded, he removed his glasses and addressed the room. "Before I take this matter under advisement, I notice the child is present." He looked directly at Miguel. "Young man, would you like to add anything to these proceedings? This is unusual, but given the nature of this case, I'd like to hear from you directly." A hushed anticipation fell over the courtroom. Gabriel's attorney began to object, but Judge Velasco raised his hand. "This is at my discretion, Counselor. I'd like to hear what the boy has to say." Miguel stood, clutching his blue notebook. This was the moment he had prepared for over 6 long months. He took a deep breath and walked to the front of the courtroom, stopping directly before the judge's bench. "Your Honor," he began, his voice clear despite his racing heart, "I'm here today as my mother's lawyer." The room fell silent. Judge Velasco's pen paused mid-signature. Gabriel's confident posture faltered as he turned to look at his son. The moment that would change everything had finally arrived, and Miguel was ready. "Young man," Judge Velasco began, unsure whether to be amused or concerned, "this is a formal proceeding. You can't—" "I know this is an adult hearing," Miguel continued, his English precise and careful, "but I also know that under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which the Philippines ratified in 1990, I have the right to express my views freely in matters affecting my welfare. This case definitely affects my welfare." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Gabriel's attorney rose immediately. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular and inappropriate. The child has clearly been coached." "I haven't been coached," Miguel responded, looking directly at the attorney. "I've been researching. There's a difference." Judge Velasco raised his hand for silence. His interest genuinely piqued. In 30 years on the bench, he'd never encountered anything quite like this. "Mrs. Santos, while this is indeed irregular, I'm inclined to hear what the boy has to say. After all, it is his future we're deciding today." Miguel opened his notebook. "I've prepared some notes, Your Honor. They explain why my father's petition for sole custody is based on misleading information." He took a deep breath and began presenting his case with the methodical precision of someone 3 times his age. He explained how his father's claims about his mother's work schedule failed to account for the careful arrangements she had made for his care. He presented his color-coded schedules, pointing out that in the past year, his father had spent a total of 26 hours with him, compared to his mother's consistent daily presence. "My father claims he can provide better educational opportunities," Miguel continued. "That's true in theory. He has more money, but he doesn't know that I've already skipped 2 grades in mathematics, that I've won the regional science fair 3 times, or that my current teacher gives me university-level reading assignments because I finished the standard curriculum in the first month of school." Gabriel shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Miguel methodically dismantled each argument presented by his legal team. "The final reason my father gives for wanting custody is that he can provide a more stable home environment with his new wife. But I've only met Tita Sofia 5 times in 4 years." Miguel paused, glancing briefly at his stepmother, whose expression had frozen into a mask of polite discomfort. "And during my recent weekend stay at their house, I overheard some conversations that suggest their interest in me isn't really about my welfare." Gabriel sat up straighter. "Your Honor, whatever the boy thinks he heard—" "I don't think I heard it," Miguel interrupted, reaching into his pocket. "I know I heard it. I recorded it." The courtroom fell completely silent. Attorney Mendoza stepped forward. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, we'd like to play a brief audio recording that directly pertains to the motivations behind this custody petition." Judge Velasco considered for a moment. "This is highly unusual, but so is this entire situation. Proceed, but be brief." Attorney Mendoza accepted the recorder from Miguel and placed it on the evidence table. With a nod from the judge, she pressed play. Gabriel's voice filled the courtroom, clear and unmistakable. "Once we secure custody, we'll have access to the education trust his grandmother set up. That's 3 million pesos we can direct toward appropriate schooling, which, frankly, can include the property investment near the new international school. The tax benefits alone make this worthwhile." The recording continued, revealing a conversation between Gabriel and his financial advisor, discussing the strategic advantages of having a dependent child, including specific mentions of tax benefits and access to family trust funds that required Gabriel to have custody. As the recording ended, Gabriel's face had drained of color. His attorney was hurriedly writing notes. clearly, preparing to challenge the admissibility of the evidence. Sophia stared straight ahead, her expression unreadable. "I have 7 more recordings," Miguel said quietly, "including one where my father discusses sending me to boarding school in Singapore, so I won't interfere with their lifestyle. I didn't want to play them all because some of the things they say about my mother are unkind." Judge Velasco removed his glasses, genuinely moved by the boy's presentation. "This is at most unusual," he said finally, "but I believe it provides valuable insight." He turned toward Gabriel and his attorney. "Mrs. Santos, would you like to respond to this evidence?" The attorney leaned over to whisper urgently with Gabriel, who appeared increasingly uncomfortable. After a moment of intense consultation, she straightened. "Your Honor, we question the admissibility of recordings made without all parties' consent, and we believe that Mrs. Reyes has inappropriately involved the child in adult legal matters." "I involved myself," Miguel said firmly. "My mother didn't know about any of this until 2 weeks ago. She didn't even know I was recording conversations or researching case law." Isabella nodded confirmation, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and concern as she watched her son stand his ground. Judge Velasco studied Miguel thoughtfully. "Young man, is there anything else you'd like to tell this court before I consider my ruling?" Miguel closed his notebook and looked directly at the judge. "Yes, Your Honor, I love my father. I believe he cares about me in his way. But my mother is the one who knows that I can't sleep when it rains hard, that I'm allergic to peanuts but not tree nuts, and that I want to be a doctor someday, like her." His voice wavered slightly, but he continued. "My father wants custody now because it benefits him financially and socially, not because he knows what's best for me." He turned to look at Gabriel. "I wish my father wanted to spend time with me because he wants to know me, not because I'm useful for his taxes or his image. Maybe someday that will change, I hope it does. But right now, my home is with my mother." The courtroom remained perfectly still as Miguel returned to his seat beside Isabella, who wiped a tear from her cheek before squeezing her son's hand. Judge Velasco cleared his throat, visibly affected by what he had witnessed. "I believe I've heard enough to make my determination," he said. "This court will take a 30-minute recess, after which I will deliver my ruling." As the judge rose and retreated to his chambers, the courtroom erupted in hushed conversations. Gabriel remained seated, conferring intensely with his attorney. Across the aisle, Attorney Mendoza leaned toward Isabella and Miguel. "That was extraordinary," she whispered. "In 20 years of practice, I've never seen anything like it." Isabella put her arm around Miguel's shoulders. "Are you okay, Anak?" He nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of what he had done. "Do you think the judge believed me?" "I think," Attorney Mendoza said carefully, "that Judge Velasco saw exactly what I saw when we first met, a remarkably brave and articulate young man telling his truth. And in my experience, that kind of authentic testimony is very difficult to ignore." As they waited for the judge's return, Miguel found himself oddly calm. He had done everything he could, presented every fact, revealed every truth. Whatever happened next was beyond his control. He closed his eyes and leaned against his mother's shoulder, drawing strength from her presence just as he always had. The future remained uncertain, but for this moment he had spoken his truth, and somehow that felt like victory regardless of the outcome. When Judge Velasco returned to the courtroom, his demeanor had changed subtly. There was a thoughtfulness in his expression, a deliberateness to his movements that suggested the weight of the decision he was about to deliver. The room fell silent as he took his seat and arranged his papers. "In the matter of Reyes versus Reyes," he began, his voice measured and clear, "I have considered the arguments and evidence presented by both parties. I have reviewed financial statements, character testimonies, and school records, but most significantly, I have heard directly from the child whose future is at stake in these proceedings." He looked directly at Miguel. "Young man, this court is impressed not only by your courage, but by your clarity of thought and expression. While children are not typically allowed to direct custody proceedings, your insights have proven invaluable in understanding the true dynamics at play." Judge Velasco turned his attention to Gabriel. "Mr. Reyes, the evidence suggests your petition for custody is motivated primarily by financial considerations rather than genuine concern for your son's welfare. The recordings, while unusual evidence, reveal troubling intentions that cannot be overlooked." Gabriel's attorney began to object, but the judge raised his hand. The recordings are admissible under Philippine law as single-party consent was present, and they directly pertain to the child's welfare, which is this court's primary concern. He continued, furthermore, the evidence clearly demonstrates that Mrs. Reyes has provided a stable, nurturing environment in which Miguel has thrived despite financial limitations. She has been consistently present in his life, attentive to his needs, and supportive of his development. Judge Velasco folded his hands. Therefore, it is the ruling of this court that primary physical and legal custody of Miguel Reyes shall remain with Isabella Reyes. Mr. Reyes will retain visitation rights on alternate weekends and shared holidays as previously established. A soft gasp of relief escaped Isabella as she reached for Miguel's hand. Across the aisle, Gabriel's expression hardened, his attorney already scribbling notes for a potential appeal. Additionally, the judge continued, this court orders that the educational trust established by Miguel's grandmother shall be administered by a neutral third-party trustee approved by the court, with expenditures permitted only for direct educational expenses. Neither parent may access these funds for any other purpose. He looked at Gabriel pointedly. This court takes a dim view of attempts to use children as financial assets, Mr. Reyes. Should evidence of such behavior continue, your visitation rights may be subject to review. With a final tap of his gavel, Judge Velasco concluded, court is adjourned. The aftermath was a blur of emotion. Isabella embraced Miguel tightly, tears streaming down her face. Attorney Mendoza gathered their documents, her usual professional reserve softened by a genuine smile. Across the room, Gabriel conferred with his legal team, occasionally glancing toward Miguel with an expression that had shifted from confidence to something more complex, perhaps regret, perhaps respect. As they prepared to leave the courtroom, Gabriel approached them alone. Isabella, he began stiffly, then turned to Miguel. Son, you were impressive today. Miguel studied his father, seeing him perhaps more clearly than ever before, not as the powerful, infallible figure of his early childhood, nor as the villain he had sometimes imagined during the custody battle, but simply as a flawed man who had made poor choices. Thank you, father, he replied simply. Gabriel hesitated, seemingly at a loss for words, an unusual state for a man accustomed to commanding every room he entered. Perhaps we could start over in some ways. I'd like to know more about your science awards and your mathematics advancement. Miguel glanced at his mother, who nodded slightly, encouraging him to respond as he wished. I have a regional competition next month, Miguel offered. You could come if you want. A flicker of something genuine crossed Gabriel's face. I'd like that. As Gabriel walked away to rejoin his attorney, Isabella knelt to Miguel's level. Are you okay with that, Anak? Having your father at your competition? Miguel considered the question carefully. I think so. Maybe he'll actually watch this time instead of being on his phone. A small smile tugged at his lips. And if he doesn't, I'll just include it in my documentation. Isabella laughed softly, shaking her head in amazement. My little lawyer, always collecting evidence. Attorney Mendoza approached, her briefcase packed and ready. Congratulations to both of you. Miguel, you were extraordinary today. We couldn't have done it without you, Isabella said warmly. I disagree, the attorney replied. You had the perfect advocate. All along. She handed Miguel a business card, different from the one Attorney Cruz had given him. This one had gold lettering and the embossed seal of her law firm. When you're ready for law school, Miguel, come see me. I think you might have a future in family advocacy. Miguel accepted the card reverently, tucking it carefully into his notebook. Thank you, Attorney Mendoza. 3 months. Later, life had settled into a new rhythm. Isabella still worked at Manila General Hospital, though she had been promoted to senior nursing supervisor, a position with more regular hours and slightly better pay. Miguel continued to excel in school, his teachers increasingly adapting the curriculum to challenge his remarkable mind. Most surprisingly, Gabriel had begun to make genuine efforts to connect with his son. His weekend visits, once perfunctory and distracted, now included actual conversations and shared activities. He had attended Miguel's science competition as promised, arriving early and watching attentively as Miguel explained his project on sustainable urban water systems, which won first place. On this particular Sunday afternoon, Miguel sat at their kitchen table working on a new project, a proposal for his school to implement a peer mentoring program. Isabella moved around the kitchen preparing pancit, occasionally glancing at her son with quiet pride. "Mama," Miguel said without looking up from his work, "do you think people can really change?" Isabella paused, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think people can choose to be better if they want to badly enough. Why do you ask?" Miguel tapped his pencil thoughtfully against his notebook. "Father actually listened when I explained my mathematics problem yesterday. He didn't check his phone once, and he asked questions that made sense." "That's good, Anak." "He also said he's setting up a college fund for me, separate from Lola's trust, one that he can't touch." Miguel looked up at his mother. "Do you think he means it?" Isabella came to sit beside him, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "I think your father is realizing what he almost lost. Sometimes people need to face consequences before they understand the value of what they have." Miguel nodded thoughtfully. "Like in the scientific method, you have to test your hypothesis and analyze the results before you can reach a valid conclusion." Isabella laughed softly. "Something like that, yes. I'm still keeping records," Miguel admitted, "just in case." "Of course you are." Isabella ruffled his hair affectionately. "I wouldn't expect anything less from my little lawyer." "Actually," Miguel said, closing his notebook, "I've been thinking maybe I want to be a judge someday, like Judge Velasco." He listened when most adults wouldn't have. Isabella studied her son, his serious eyes behind his glasses, the determined set of his jaw, the compassion that balanced his analytical mind. "I think you would make an excellent judge, Miguel. You see people clearly, and you understand what justice really means." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. It was Mrs. Dyson from next door, bringing a small cake to celebrate Miguel's science competition victory. Soon their modest apartment was filled with neighbors and friends, Lola arriving with more food, Mr. Aquino from the university library bringing a new book on environmental engineering, even Ms. Cruz and her brother stopping by with congratulations. As Miguel moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and discussing his project with genuine enthusiasm, Isabella watched from the kitchen doorway. Their life wasn't perfect or luxurious. Their apartment was still small, her work still demanding, but they were surrounded by a community of people who genuinely cared for them, who had supported them through the darkest days of uncertainty. And at the center of it all was her remarkable son, no longer just a bright child with an exceptional mind, but a young person who had discovered his own voice and power. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Isabella knew with absolute certainty that Miguel would face them with the same courage and integrity he had shown in that courtroom. Some victories changed more than just circumstances. Some transformed the very people who fought for them, and in that transformation lay the true meaning of justice. The auditorium of St. Francis Academy buzzed with anticipation as parents, teachers, and students settled into their seats for the annual Recognition Day ceremony. Banners celebrating academic excellence hung from the rafters, and a table laden with medals and certificates stood ready at the side of the stage. In the front row, Isabella sat with perfect posture, her nursing uniform freshly pressed, despite her having come directly from an early hospital shift. Beside her sat Gabriel, looking slightly out of place but undeniably proud in his business suit. They exchanged polite nods, the kind of civil acknowledgement that had characterized their interactions over the past 2 years. "He's giving the speech, yes?" Gabriel asked, adjusting his tie nervously. Isabella nodded. "Valedictorian of the graduating class, the youngest in the school's history." "At 11, Gabriel shook his head in amazement. "Sometimes I can hardly believe he's our son." "I believe it," Isabella replied softly. "He has your confidence and my stubbornness. A powerful combination." On Isabella's other side, Lola patted her daughter's hand. "And my brains," she added with a wink, causing both parents to smile, despite themselves. The principal approached the podium, and the audience fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed faculty and fellow students, welcome to our annual Recognition Day. It is my distinct pleasure to begin today's ceremony by introducing our student speaker, the youngest valedictorian in St. Francis Academy's 60-year history and the recipient of this year's National Young Leaders Scholarship. Please welcome to the stage Miguel Reyes." Applause filled the auditorium as Miguel walked confidently to the podium. At 11, he had grown several inches taller, though he remained slight for his age. His school uniform was impeccable, his posture straight, his gaze steady as he surveyed the crowd. Only the slight adjustment of his glasses, a familiar gesture to those who knew him well, betrayed any nervousness. "Honorable guests, teachers, parents, and my fellow students," he began, his voice clear and measured. "2 years ago, I stood in a very different room, before a very different audience. I was frightened, but determined to speak my truth." In the audience, Isabella and Gabriel exchanged a brief glance, both recognizing the reference to the courtroom that had changed all their lives. "That day taught me something important," Miguel continued. "Our voices matter, even when we're young, especially when we're young. We see the world with fresh eyes, unblinded by the compromises adults sometimes make with their dreams." He paused, looking directly at his classmates. "Each of us has a unique perspective to share. Each of us has truths that deserve to be heard. And when we speak those truths with clarity and respect, we have the power to change not just our own lives, but the lives of those around us." The speech continued, Miguel weaving personal anecdotes with philosophical insights that seemed remarkable coming from someone so young. He acknowledged his teachers, his classmates, and finally his family. "To my grandmother, who taught me that wisdom doesn't always come from books. To my father, who showed me that people can change when they choose to look honestly at themselves." Gabriel shifted in his seat, visibly moved by this unexpected acknowledgement. "And to my mother," Miguel's voice softened slightly, "who demonstrated every day what true strength looks like, not in grand gestures or powerful positions, but in the quiet courage of showing up again and again for the people you love." Isabella blinked back tears as Miguel concluded his speech to enthusiastic applause. The principal returned to the podium, announcing the presentation of awards and scholarships. Miguel received not only the valedictorian medal, but also special recognitions in mathematics, science, and civic leadership. The ceremony continued with other students receiving their awards, but Isabella found her mind wandering to the remarkable journey of the past 2 years. After the custody hearing, life had changed in ways she couldn't have anticipated. Gabriel, humbled by the experience and genuinely impressed by his son's courage, had gradually transformed his approach to fatherhood. Weekend visits became consistent and engaged. He attended school events faithfully, his phone remaining in his pocket. Most surprisingly, he had approached Isabella 6 months after the hearing with a proposal for co-parenting counseling, a suggestion that would have seemed impossible before. The relationship between father and son remained a work in progress, with occasional missteps and misunderstandings, but there was genuine effort on Gabriel's part, and a cautious openness from Miguel to know his father beyond the adversarial roles they had occupied. Isabella's career had flourished as well. Her promotion had led to further opportunities at Manila General, culminating in her recent appointment as Director of Nursing Education, a position that utilized her clinical skills, while allowing more regular hours to be present for Miguel. As for Miguel himself, the shy, serious boy who had once hidden his legal research from his mother had blossomed into a confident young advocate. His academic acceleration had continued, placing him 2 grades ahead of his age group. But more significant was his growing passion for helping other children navigate challenges. He had founded a peer counseling program at St. Francis, creating a space where students could seek advice from trained classmates on everything from academic struggles to family difficulties. The ceremony concluded with a final round of applause as the principal congratulated all the honorees. As families began to mingle in the reception area, Miguel made his way through the crowd to where his family waited. "You were magnificent, Anak," Isabella said, embracing him tightly. "Very impressive," Gabriel added, offering a somewhat awkward but sincere hug. "Your points about perspective and change were particularly insightful." Miguel accepted their praise with a modest smile. "I had good material to work with." "The National Young Leaders Scholarship," Lola said proudly. "That will open many doors for you." "It covers university tuition," Miguel explained to his father. "I can study anywhere in the Philippines." "University?" Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "You're 11. "The scholarship can be held until I'm ready," Miguel clarified. "I have time to decide." As they moved toward the reception, Miguel was approached by a small group of younger students, their expressions a mixture of admiration and hesitation. "Miguel, could you help us with something?" one of them asked. "We want to start a science club, but we need an advisor." "Of course," Miguel replied immediately. Come to the library tomorrow at lunch and we'll make a plan. Isabella watched this exchange with quiet pride. This was who her son had become, not just a brilliant student, but a leader who used his gifts to lift others. As the young students departed, Miguel rejoined his family. Always helping someone, Isabella observed. Miguel shrugged. I remember what it's like to need guidance. Speaking of which, he turned to his father. Could we visit the new Science Museum this weekend? There's an exhibit on environmental engineering I'd like to see. Gabriel nodded, clearly pleased by the invitation. I'll make arrangements. Perhaps we could have dinner afterward with Isabella and Lola. He glanced at his ex-wife questioningly. That would be nice, Isabella agreed, recognizing the gesture for what it was, another small step in their evolving family dynamic. As they moved through the reception, accepting congratulations and engaging in conversation, Miguel reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The courtroom battle had not been the end, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, one where truth had created space for growth, understanding, and even forgiveness. On a bright Tuesday afternoon, Manila's Justice Complex stood gleaming in the sunlight, its modern glass facade a stark contrast to the colonial architecture surrounding it. Inside, the newly renovated family court wing buzzed with activity. Lawyers consulting with clients, court officers, directing visitors, families waiting anxiously for their cases to be called. Miguel Reyes, now 13, moved through these familiar halls with purpose. His school backpack was slung over one shoulder, containing not homework, but carefully organized folders of research and notes. At his side walked a nervous-looking woman in her early 30s, clutching the hand of a 7-year-old girl whose wide eyes took in the imposing surroundings. It's going to be okay, Mrs. Mendez, Miguel assured the woman. Judge Velasco is fair. He listens carefully, especially to children. Mrs. Mendez nodded uncertainly. I still can't believe you're doing this, Miguel. Most boys your age would be playing basketball or video games after school. Miguel smiled. I play basketball too. This is just different. They reached a small conference room where attorney Lucia Mendoza waited, reviewing documents at a table. She looked up as they entered, her professional demeanor softening into a warm smile at the sight of Miguel. Right on time, she noted. Did you explain to Mrs. Mendez and Sophia how this works? I did, Miguel confirmed. Sophia knows she'll be speaking with Judge Velasco, privately, and that she can say whatever she feels without worrying about upsetting either parent. The young girl looked up at the mention of her name. Like you did when you were 9? She asked Miguel. Similar, yes, he replied, kneeling to her level. Remember what we practiced. Just tell the truth about what you want and how you feel. Judge Velasco is very good at listening. Attorney. Mendoza watched this exchange with evident pride. Miguel has become one of our most valuable volunteers in the child advocacy program, she explained to Mrs. Mendez. He helps children prepare for court appearances and makes sure they understand their rights to be heard in custody proceedings. What had begun as a casual inquiry, Miguel visiting attorney Mendoza's office 2 years after his own, custody hearing to ask about career paths in law, had evolved into a formal volunteer position. Now every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, Miguel worked with the child advocacy program, helping children navigate the intimidating world of family court. Case number 8921, Mendez versus Diaz, announced a court officer from the doorway. Judge Velasco's chambers in 5 minutes. As attorney Mendoza gathered her materials, Miguel gave Sophia a reassuring smile. Remember, your voice matters, just like mine did. After the Mendez family departed with attorney Mendoza, Miguel checked his watch. His mother would be finishing her lecture at the College of Nursing soon. They had planned to meet for an early dinner before his evening commitment, a meeting of the Youth Justice Council where he served as the junior representative for children's rights in family court. As he waited in the courthouse lobby, a familiar figure approached, Judge Ramon Velasco, now in his casual clothes, having concluded his cases for the day. Miguel, the judge greeted him warmly. Another advocacy day? Yes, sir. The Mendez case is with you this afternoon. Judge Velasco nodded. Ah, yes. Attorney Mendoza mentioned you had been working with the daughter. He studied Miguel thoughtfully. You know, when you stood in my courtroom 4 years ago, I never imagined you would become a fixture here. Miguel adjusted his glasses, a gesture that remained from childhood despite his growing confidence. That day changed everything for me. I realize that children's voices often go unheard in decisions that affect them the most, and you've been changing that one case at a time." The judge smiled. "The program reports that children you work with show significantly less anxiety and give more articulate testimony. They just need someone to believe they matter," Miguel replied simply. Judge Velasco checked his watch. "I should get back for the Mendez hearing. Will I see you at the family law reform committee meeting next week? I believe they're discussing the proposed amendments to the child testimony procedures you helped draft." "I'll be there," Miguel confirmed. "My mother or father will bring me." The judge nodded approvingly. "Your parents have come a long way. It's not every divorced couple who would collaborate to support their son's rather unusual extracurricular activities." After Judge Velasco departed, Miguel made his way outside to wait for his mother. The afternoon sun warmed his face as he sat on a bench overlooking the courthouse plaza, where a new installation had been erected, a sculpture representing justice, but with a unique twist. Alongside the traditional blindfolded figure stood smaller figures representing children, their hands raised as if speaking. Miguel had been consulted on the design, part of a government initiative to make the justice system more responsive to children's needs. It was one of many small changes emerging from the ripples of his courtroom stand 4 years ago. Isabella arrived precisely on time, as always. Despite her elevated position at the hospital and the College of Nursing, she still wore simple, practical clothes, her identity defined by her work and her relationships rather than status or appearance. "How was your advocacy day?" she asked as they walked toward a nearby cafe, their Tuesday tradition. "Good. I think Sophia will do well with Judge Velasco." Miguel adjusted his backpack. "And you? How was the lecture?" 25 new nursing students who actually asked insightful questions. "A good day." Isabella smiled. "Your father called. He wanted to confirm your Saturday plans." These casual mentions of coordination with Gabriel no longer carried tension. The years had smoothed the sharp edges of their past conflict, creating a workable, respectful co-parenting relationship. Gabriel remained ambitious and status-conscious, but his priorities had shifted. His weekend activities with Miguel now centered on his son's interests rather than social appearances, and he had become an unexpected ally in Miguel's advocacy work, occasionally using his business connections to arrange funding for the program. As they settled at their usual table, Isabella studied her son's face. "You look tired, Anak. Are you taking on too much again?" Miguel shook his head. "I'm managing. The new school curriculum is challenging but interesting." His academic path remained exceptional. Now enrolled in a specialized program that combined high school and early university courses tailored to his advanced abilities while ensuring he maintained social connections with peers. "Attorney Mendoza asked if I'd consider interning at her firm next summer," he added, unable to hide his excitement. "Just 2 days a week, helping with research for family cases." Isabella's eyes widened. "That's a tremendous opportunity. Do you want to accept?" "I think so, if you and Father agree." Isabella reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "Of course we do. We're both so proud of the path you're creating." As they enjoyed their meal, conversation flowing easily between them, Miguel reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that desperate night when he'd first discovered the custody papers, through months of secret research, to the dramatic courtroom confrontation and everything that had followed, each step had shaped not just his future, but his understanding of justice, truth, and courage. The frightened 9-year-old with his blue notebook had transformed into a purposeful young advocate, channeling his unique abilities toward helping others find their voices. His family, once fractured by conflict, had reformed into something new, not perfect, but functional and respectful, bound by shared commitment to his well-being. "Penny for your thoughts?" Isabella asked, noticing his contemplative expression. Miguel smiled. "I was just thinking about how things turned out. Not what I expected, but maybe better in some ways." "That's often how life works," Isabella replied wisely. "We fight so hard for what we think we want, only to discover that the journey itself changes what we need." As they finished their meal and prepared to head to Miguel's council meeting, he took a final glance back at the Justice Complex, its windows reflecting the golden late-afternoon light. Inside those walls, a young girl was finding her voice today, just as he had once found his. Some victories created ripples that extended far beyond the moment of triumph. Some truths, once spoken, continued to echo, and some journeys, begun in fear and desperation, ultimately led to places of purpose and peace that no one could have imagined at the start. "Ready?" Isabella asked, gathering her things. Miguel nodded, shouldering his backpack once more. "Ready." Together they stepped forward into the future they had fought for and won. One truth, one day, one voice at a time.